Okay, I need to talk about what's going on with our journalists on the ground in Gaza, whom are literally in fear for their lives every single minute of every single day. And it's not just their own lives. They are in constant fear for the lives of their families, as they are all being specifically targeted by Israeli forces. And whoever denies that claim and still thinks they are just unintentional casualties of war is an utter imbecile, lacks any ounce of moral judgment, and is a flat-out racist bigot that has zero value for Palestinian life. But for those openly bigoted and ignorant individuals out there, I'll break it down for you to further expose your stupidity and make it nearly impossible for you to ever utter any argument against the deliberate targeting of journalists, which is a blatant war crime, as journalists are protected under international humanitarian law against direct attacks. Targeting journalists constitutes a breach of the Geneva Conventions, and furthermore, intentionally or indiscriminately attacking civilians, including journalists, is a war crime. So let's get started. 101 journalists have been killed in 78 days. What does that mean? This means that 1 to 2 journalists per day are being killed by the Israeli forces. And this does not factor in the many family members of journalists that they have already killed to deter the journalists from covering the genocide taking place in real time. According to the International Federation of Journalists, over 73% of the total number of journalists and media workers killed globally so far in 2023 have been in Gaza, and it has now been deemed the deadliest place for journalists and their families in the entire world. Mr. Mustafa Hayyash, the founder and director of the Gaza Now news agency, was killed along with at least 8 members of his family, including children, in an apparent airstrike on his house in El Nusayrat camp on November 22nd. And on December 9th, an apparent airstrike on the home of Ms. Ula Atallah, a prominent journalist in Al-Daraj area in the eastern Gaza City, was killed along with 9 members of her family. And on October 24th, Al Jazeera viewers witnessed correspondent Wa'il al-Dahdouh receive news on air of the killing of his wife, son, daughter, and grandson. Wa'il was just targeted himself and injured a few days ago on December 15th, along with his colleague Samir Abu Daqqa, who was shot and left to bleed to death due to Israeli forces blocking medical aid from getting to Samir. Wa'il not only survived the attack with injuries, but he went on air the next day like a boss to report on the continued atrocities by the Israeli forces. He did the same after he heard of his family's death back in October, because he understands that their journalistic voices are limited and dwindling by the day, and he'd rather die reporting the truth than live silent or lie like our Western news media cowards and racists. And yes, I'm looking directly at you, CNN, ABC, CBS, AP News, BBC, Sky News, and our forever lost cause, Fox News. You are all the most shameful, as these journalists in Gaza are supposed to be your brethren, your family, who no matter what you should stick up for and report the truth in their honor, as they lost their lives upholding the sanctity of truth and journalistic integrity. Something you lot can never say. So shame on all of you who have been disrespecting the profession and those who are significantly more noble than you, who have lost their lives doing it right. So let me put this into perspective for you. I'll repeat again. 1 to 2 journalists per day are dying at the hands of the Israeli apartheid regime. So let's create a scenario for you right here in the U.S. for only the next 10 days, which is a far cry from the 80 days Gaza journalists have gone through thus far. What would you do if on Monday, Anderson Cooper was murdered? Tuesday, Wolf Blitzer and Katie Couric, along with their entire families, were murdered. Wednesday, Lester Holt and his entire family murdered. Thursday, Christiane Amanpour, murdered. Friday, Sean Hannity and Diane Sawyer, murdered. Saturday, Joe Scarborough and Rachel Maddow, murdered. Sunday, Tucker Carlson, murdered. Monday, Aaron Burnett and Dana Bash, murdered along with their entire families. Tuesday, George Stephanopoulos, murdered. And Wednesday, Bill O'Reilly and Megyn Kelly, murdered. That's about 15 journalists or news anchors in 10 days, which is equivalent to what is happening in Gaza. So here's my question. If you were watching the news and they told you that all 15 of those journalists' lives lost, along with their family members, in these consecutive 10 days, or as a result of one group's airstrikes and snipers, would you come to the conclusion that this one group was specifically targeting journalists? Let's take it a step further, and as difficult as this scenario is to believe, just bear with me. Now let's say those 15 journalists were all reporting the truth against the atrocities of that said one violent group that didn't like how they were being portrayed to the world. Would it be more obvious that they were specifically targeting these journalists to shut them up? Seriously, please answer that thoughtfully. My point is, there's nothing more apparent and more clear than the Israeli forces' purposeful targeting of journalists, which again is a war crime and must be dealt with through international law. The killing of journalists, their forced displacement from the north, and severe movement restrictions have greatly hindered efforts to monitor, document, and report on the situation in Gaza and on violations and abuses of international law. Information is already scarce due to the power and internet connectivity blackouts resulting from the IOF strikes on key infrastructures. But despite these obstacles, these journalists who endure personal loss and the lack of basic necessities along with the rest of the civilian population continue to fulfill their functions to keep the world aware of the widening and deepening horrors taking place in Gaza and the West Bank. And for this reason, we as an international population must do everything in our power to protect them and amplify their voices every single day. And before I end this, I just want to quickly say, Wa'el, Mu'taz, Bisan, Ihab, Plestia, and all you other courageous and noble voices out there sending out everything you can to us in the midst of a literal hell on earth. We love you so much. We are in awe of you. And we all know that your pinky fingers alone have more integrity than any of our Western news media pundits we have over here. You are all our heroes. We will never forget you or your sacrifices for the rest of eternity. And rest assured that speaking for myself and many others like me, I will have your back and yell in harmony with you to ensure your voices are heard louder than ever. Peace and love.